Hi, this is Paul. Kanye was on Rogan, and folks were all over me about the conversation. It was fascinating. And Kanye, as Peugeot and a number of others have noted, has been fascinating to watch lately. And Kanye's God. Kanye's God is big, bold, and personal. And even though Kanye speaks like few others with his like few others with his normal talk, his talk is pretty much black evangelical in terms of how he frames it, the way he talks. Now, this type of talk, when white folks do it, usually doesn't go real well, especially in a public space. But the black church is usually treated very differently in public. Um, you'll see in TV shows and movies the portrayal of white churches versus black churches is very different. Black churches are shown as hip, cool, fun. White churches as hypocritical, boring, dead. Unless it's highly liturgical and highly symbolic, a cathedral or something like that, and then maybe there'll be a sense of awe, or Halloween will come up and they'll do Halloween type things and in those types of churches. Now, is this different treatment of outspoken God number two black Christians, sort of the soft bigotry of low expectations? I thought Kanye's treatment of race, just the language he used, was just fascinated me in terms of. I mean, watching Kanye talk is sort of like watching Twitter in a blender. Just files through things so rapidly. And compare that to, again, when Matthew McConaughey was just recently on Rogan and answered some questions about his religious beliefs, and that got segmented out into a clip because Joe Rogan has his main channel and then he has the clips. Just notice the difference in treatment and in the way Matthew McConaughey thinks he can talk. And now Matthew McConaughey and Kanye, they're not in exactly the same industries, but they're swimming in the same super high status cultural waters. And notice all the ways that Matthew McConaughey sort of dips and weaves and ducks, and it just again the liberty or concern that each of them feels with respect to the way they talk about their God number two faith is markedly different. So McConaughey's religion seems just as much infused with God number two, but lots of couching it and wisdom, and he's not going to go full Chris Pratt and be called out and canceled on Twitter for Chris Pratt's belief. But Kanye, not like that. Kanye, it's just all there. It's all out there. He doesn't care. And Joe Rogan just sort of, accepts it. And then Scott Adams did a little commentary on Kanye's appearance. And Scott was just loving it, eating it with a spoon. So he lauds the interview heavily and gushes over Kanye's redesign of America, if the time is right. And there's a lot of similarity between Kanye and Trump on a lot of different levels. And I know some of you will bristle when you hear that. The people on both sides of the aisle will bristle when they hear that. But when you listen to Kanye talk, very Trumpish. And so I'm not surprised that Scott Adams is big on Kanye. But Adams almost completely secular washes all the God stuff, as if God number two wasn't front and center through the entire interview. And Scott Adams says hardly a word about it, with the exception of Kanye has redesigned church. And after I watched the interview, I thought about Kanye and Qoheleth, because last time Kanye really came up on the scene and was in some of my videos, I did a little bit of so I'm a digger I watched, I was on an airplane. I had to be on an airplane. This was pre-COVID. And so I downloaded a bunch of videos about Kanye, especially biography videos about Kanye. And of course, Kanye if you haven't looked into who his mother was, who his father was, what life was like growing up for him, his long-term relationship with a porn star, his relationships in rap, and then, on and on and on and on. In some ways, Kanye is Qoheleth. Qoheleth is the main character, the assembler or the teacher. Some look at it as Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. Because what hasn't Kanye done? Okay? And Kanye, and this is Scott Adams' point, and it's enormously important, because sometimes when I listen to Kanye, so he's got a diagnosis as bipolar, and I talk to a fair number of bipolar people, and so, they're usually all excited to talk when they're manic. And so there's very much a manic element to Kanye. But as Scott Adams says, at the same time, you don't just simply dismiss the guy, because he has been successful. He has dug himself out of debt, as Kanye talks about. He has started, multi-billion-dollar enterprises. He has been at the forefront of music, and he's done it by being himself. And so, whereas in some ways, listening to him talk reminds me of a lot of conversations with a lot of people who are sleeping on the streets, Kanye's not sleeping on the streets. And so, and this is where some of Peugeot's talk about the fool really, really sticks with me, because with a lot of my conversations with people who are sleeping on the streets, or people who are in group homes, or people who are spending significant amount of times in and out of psych wards, Peugeot's observation about the fool I find dead on right. I will sometimes find people who are the fool saying things that are just so strikingly true. And they can say it because they're the fool, because they're the insane one, because they're the homeless person. But sometimes they just speak the truth that no one dares to speak. And so the archetype of the gesture or the fool, that's right on. And so look in Kanye's background. He's tried everything. He's done everything. He's been everywhere. And he's withheld nothing. And so when you listen to Kanye and where he's at right now with respect to God, it's full Ecclesiastes 12. The book of Ecclesiastes, you find this guy who was building things and enjoying women and having children and withholding nothing from himself. And when you listen to what Kanye is doing with his time, at one point Joe Rogan asked him a question, how do you structure your day? And basically Kanye follows his heart. He does whatever he wants to. And he is productive in these things, and he starts things, and he tries things, and he fails at things. And again, he comes all the way to the end of the book of Ecclesiastes and basically says, fear God and keep his commandments. And that's where Kanye's at. But as Peugeot noted in his recent, just landed today, the commentary video on Kanye and his comments on that, he acknowledges his hypocrisy. He acknowledges his failures. He's just all out there. And he's just putting it all out. And he wants his kids in church. So, some of the things he says, they sound like the most conservative Christian you can find. And here he is on Joe Rogan just laying it out. And Joe Rogan's taking him seriously. He's not simply dismissing. So, in the White House right now, we've got Donald Trump, I wouldn't really put him as a Qoheleth creature, because he is, at least some of the first chapters, he withholds nothing from himself. But at the same time, Donald Trump really hasn't landed at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes and says, fear God and keep his commandments. That's just not Donald Trump. But he's paired with Mike Pence, who, Donald Trump is hated and criticized for how he treats women, and in my opinion, rightfully so. But at the same time, Mike Pence is criticized for his puritanical prudishness. And, this is sort of after the Obama administration, with whatever you think of Barack Obama's politics as a family man. Barack Obama is a straight Christian as you can find. In love with his wife, apparently, and loyal to her. And Barack Obama's worst family sin is he likes to sneak a cigarette now and then. But he's the consummate family man. And so here we have Kanye, and of course Kanye is married to Kim Kardashian. She's the woman who broke ground being famous for being famous and using social media and television and mass media to make a brand out of herself and really nothing more. Not a singer, not a designer, not an anything, just herself. And so Kanye seems to have that, plus his musical gifts and his design talents. It's just all out there. But then, of course, the church redesign, which, that's when I first made a couple of videos about Kanye, because the Sunday service. And so you're making church look cool again. And it's the money and the fame and the status validation. And so you've got celebrities and the beautiful people and the elites, wanting to get in on that Sunday service. And you have this preacher from Masters University coupled with, some of the best black musicians and many black musicians grew up in the church. And so when I watch all these things come together, it's like, wow, it's just, there's this scene in, I don't remember which of the Marvel movies, but Thor's got to go out there and, his hammer's been, he needs a new weapon to attack Thanos, and so he's going to get the big axe, but he's got to go to the dwarves that are going to, the dwarves, the gnomes, I don't know what they are, that are going to make it for him. And there's this scene where Thor just has to kind of hold the world together, or hold these things together, and it's a very dramatic scene, but you almost get the sense of Kanye just takes the stuff and just pushes it together. And so you've got the likes of, Joe Rogan. If you watch enough Joe Rogan, you have ideas of where his spirituality lies, or Scott Adams, who's got very interesting ideas on this. Neither of them anywhere near God number twoism, but both of them just, watch Kanye and got nothing to say against it, So Kanye just manages to do these things and just sort of shuts him up. Now, Jonathan, I was going back finding his tweets, and then, he just put out a video today on it, and it's well worth watching. Art and story and life. And I think Jonathan is exactly right that Kanye needs something to bring him focus, because Kanye is just taking all of these things and they're just all in a whirl. And Rogan, and Adams is right. Rogan's a master interviewer in many ways. Rogan just, pulls. Rogan is the kind of interviewer that few network interviewers dare to be. Okay, because Rogan is Rogan, and he's just going to be himself. But he sort of pulls the thread out of Kanye and helps give it focus and sort of land it down to earth so that we can digest it. Otherwise, it's just all of this stuff just swirling around and around and around. And Kanye talks a lot about Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs was the reducer. Steve Jobs, take all those buttons off your phone, take all those buttons off your computer, and if you that fun new little magnetic wireless charging port on the back of your iPhone, your ports are going away, you iPhone users. You're not even going to have buttons. It's just, we're just going to have this slab like in 2001 Space Odyssey with all the chimps around it. That's where the iPhone is going. But Steve Jobs was a honer and a simplifier, and Kanye is a blender. That's what, it's just the whirlwind. And so, of course, part of why God number two, and this gets into, I've sort of been, I hope my videos haven't gotten too monotonous. Again, these monologue videos are talking things through, and I'm looking for the language, and I'm trying to distill and hone, and this is the process. But God number two is central in terms of what Kanye needs to take all of the discordant images and patterns. And Peugeot is right. He's just all of these patterns, and he's upside down. And so God number 2 is what brings focus. And so it's the personhood of Rogan that sort of becomes the funnel through which all of this stuff, and Rogan just, okay, here's a thread. Here's a thread. And Rogan, through the interview, trying to, okay, Kanye is composing his symphonies, and Rogan's just, all right, well, let's just get a melody here that we can stop, so that it's not just symphony after symphony after symphony. Now, of course, Kanye is married to Kim Kardashian, and today on Twitter, I don't even, she had her 40th birthday party, and feeling 40 and feeling humbled and blessed. There's not a single day I take for granted, especially during these times when we're all reminded of the things that truly matter. And this is the quintessential big platform pablum where you say something that everyone will nod their head and it won't cause any division. And then this next one, after 2 weeks of multiple screenings and asking everyone to quarantine, I surprised my closest inner circle with a trip to a private island where we could pretend things were normal just for a brief moment in time. No masks, no social distancing. Everyone can do. Now remember, the first word in Kim Kardashian's Twitter profile is shop. Okay. And Kanye is a designer, and he sells, and he just cut his big deal with, was it Adidas? And, wanted to be on the board, and it's about selling. And so again, here it's all of these things, and he's bringing them together. And of course, this is the first lady. Now, it got memed all over the place with some hilarious memes. You've got Jurassic Park, you've got Lord of the Flies, you've got Lost, you've got Castaway. I even made one of my local meetup. But then she, we danced, rode bikes, swam near whales, kayaked, watched a movie on the beach, and so much more. I realized that for most people, this is something that is so far out of reach right now. Yeah, private island? I think so. So in moments like these, I am humbly reminded of how privileged my life is. So, it's owning your privilege. But, this is the privilege confessional absolution. As long as I own my privilege, we can, there's nothing about in a kenosis Christ-like way of denying of eliminating the privilege from my life in Philippians 2, becoming a slave, being humiliated. That's Christ doesn't just own his privilege and come shining in glory. His glory is masked and veiled. But this is very much fits into the long history of the black church. And because the leaders, the black, the Reformed pastor had better not make too much money at church or he's going to be in trouble. And the Korean pastor had better be poor, but the black pastor had better drive a Cadillac. I remember when my father's church was, my father was a little worried the church wasn't going to make it, and he was thinking about getting a part-time job to make ends meet at home. And I was in college at this point, college or seminary, and my father, grew up on the farms and so was used to physical labor. And so he had actually thought in Paterson, New Jersey of being a garbage man. And in Paterson, New Jersey, you didn't have these arms like here we have in California with these standardized buckets to put it into the big truck. So the garbage man drives around and the arm does all the lifting. In Paterson, you just had a gang of guys running behind a garbage truck, grabbing bags and cans and throwing the garbage in the back of the garbage truck. And my father thought, well, this would be early mornings and it would be good exercise. And at that point, my father was probably around my age. He was in his 50s. And he says, well, maybe I can get a job with the Paterson Department of Transportation, of Sanitation. And I said, Dad, most of your church is black. Do you understand how you would humiliate them if they saw their pastor running behind a garbage truck? My father wasn't very much into status. But, so the leader and the first lady, and Kim Kardashian is the first lady of, the would be the first lady of the Sunday service of the Kanye show, is the archetype of success. And by, you had these black churches with people who were very poor. Pastor needs a new Cadillac. Pastor that stopped payment on his last rent check to Living Stones. He got into a place across the street, and he brags to his church about how he lives in Elk Grove and has $1 million home and drives a fancy car. And that's the impetus to have the people dig deep and give in their congregation. Well, why? By contributing, by purchasing. You see, this comes together in the shop and sell and design and the style. By purchasing, by contributing, you participate in the hierarchy. You may not have the $1 million home. You may not have the Cadillac. You might not have the Lexus. You might not have the ride or the plastic surgery or all of this stuff. But if you purchase Kanye stuff, if you purchase Kim Kardashian stuff, you participate in Kim Kardashian just at the low level you can. And so then you wear the tag and you wear the brand and you wear the emblem and you're sucked up into the Kanye principality and the Kanye and Kim principality. And so there's a long history of this in the black church and in the consumer society. I love towards the 2/3 of the way through, Jonathan, as he so often does, starts putting words on things that were sort of creeping in my consciousness, Congress, and then Jonathan says it. It's like, whoosh! Oh yeah, that's right. You've just clarified it for me. All of the Kanye does not sound humble or anything in the midst of this, and as Jonathan said, part of this should terrify us. If anyone else said what he said, and a lot of the way he talks is just like Donald Trump. I mean, if God is calling me to lead the free world, as if China's still out there, but China and North Korea, but God is calling me to lead the free world. And as Jonathan Pajot said, I mean, part of that should terrify us, but it doesn't terrify us because he's the jester, he's the fool, he's the upside down, he's the unpolitician. Even just looking at how he was dressed, he's there in a hoodie, and of course that has layers of cultures. A black man in a hoodie, that has layers of cultural resonance, and very few like Kanye take all of those images and just sort of swing them in. I remember listening to John McWhorter making the observation that in some ways Trump is like a rapper in his lifestyle, and so you have Kanye and Trump, and so when they were together, people were seeing it through a particular lens. Oh, Trump is a racist, and therefore, but Kanye's right there in the office, and Kim is getting some woman let out of jail early, and on and on and on. And as Pajot says, when the world is upside down, the fools look like someone who tells the truth. And again, I've seen that throughout my life in this spiritual gift that I seem to have of attracting the. I gotta be careful with this because my wife says that of attracting the kind of people I always attract, especially in real life in my local ministry. I mean, my father had that too. We had that in Northside. We would have the craziest things happen around my father's ministry. And part of that, of course, was we've always done ministry in sort of the upside down parts of the world. And the more upside down, or at least on the bottom of the part of the world is, the more of this stuff you'll attract. And then it's on the upside. I've got so many stories, but most of these people are alive. I can't tell them. So I can mention Daniel, who's a homeless guy that I deal with very regularly. There'll be times that he says things that I just think are they're like a bolt from the blue. They're just like stark truth in the midst of insanity. And this guy, unlike Kanye, he lives in the clothes he pulls out of garbage cans, and he lives by the money and the food that people throw at him, and on and on and on. And he is bipolar, and he is institutionalized on a regular basis, and he does take meds for at least a few days after he gets out of the hospital, and then it's just back to the street drugs to try to regulate himself. So should Kanye terrify us? Why doesn't he? Well, do we take Kanye seriously? Well, what does it mean to take him seriously? And we're not even quite sure. And so you see that with Rogan all the way through the interview. But I think what Kanye does is to align, or at least to bring together, the hot, discordant, sacred. So again, Kanye's pastor is a white dude, and he's from Masters, which is the John MacArthur tribe. And John MacArthur, I talked a little bit about that with Preston Sprinkle, who went there. John MacArthur is, I could do a whole video on John MacArthur. But this is Kanye's preacher. And so in the video, Kanye talks about his why can't I think of the word? His preaching, which is sentence by sentence. And now there's a long history of that in black preaching. And I'm sure that there are a number of black pastors who are really offended that Kanye, who's way up at the top of the status hierarchy, elevates this guy to be his preacher. And of course, Kanye will bring other preachers in and so on and so forth. But this is what Kanye does. He brings together and he aligns and he puts in the same whirlwind the hot, discordant, sacred. And we just kind of watch. I mean, even look at this still from his Sunday services. And if you've watched any of his Sunday services, or at least clips from them, that's what he does. So you have this preacher from Masters University. It's sort of a strange hodgepodge between a certain American conservative. It's not really reformed. It's sort of dispensational. It's secessionist. Where now, what do I mean by secessionist? It means that, well, the miracles of God are left to the Bible times, and they've ceased now. When Kanye's living big and bold in God number 2, and God is talking to him, and God is working through him, and Kanye will sound he'll sound black. He sounds Black Baptist, and you've got this MacArthurite preaching for him. And again, it's just, the deeper you understand both of these traditions, it's just Kanye's taking these two things and he's putting them together. And it's like, those things don't go together, but Kanye's pulling it off. And people who should be talking him down for his hot number 2 God talk, just all give him a pass. And I think this is actually part of the, I've been thinking about in a little bit more serious way, the re-emergence of God number 1. That's really why Jordan Peterson lit off what he did. This is, again, God from below. This is God. This is the immanent God. This is the God whose glory is seen in creation. This is Jordan Peterson's biblical series when he speaks psychologically. And again, he wants to, he's very modernistic in how he keeps these two things together. What do I believe? Mind your own business. Even though he will at times talk about his visions and especially Jordan being a Jungian. Jordan is very open to the mystical and not at all shy about the psychedelics, but doesn't forefront it. And so Jordan won't close the door completely on what Brett Weinstein would call the supernatural. And I think that's, in my opinion, something to Jordan's credit, because Jordan is honest about it. More honest than those who are trying to maintain their status by being less honest about it. But it's the re-emergence of God number 1. C.S. Lewis in Miracles makes the observation that pantheism this is what you find with people when they get spiritual but not religious. Suddenly they discover pantheism, and they act like, I was a Christian, but now I'm so much more open, and now God is everywhere and in everything, and just sort of devolves into pantheism. And Lewis, of course, had seen this because this has been going on a long time in the culture, big at the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, and every time you sort of have a Christian awakening, this kind of stuff comes along with it. And Lewis says, yeah, it seems to fit because the old shoe fits, because there's nothing older than pantheism, and there's nothing more basic to religion worldview, as pantheism. It might be new to you, but it's not new to everything else. It's nearly the definition of religion W. And he said only, John Vervaeke put a comment in my last video, right out of The Lion, the Witch. Was it The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? It's all in Plato. What do they teach in school these days? And that's basically what Lewis says. Only in Christianity and Platonism do we see pantheism finally overcome. Now, secularity, which is, I think, willful God number 2 resistance, are acting and talking increasingly with emergence taking on agency. Arul had made the comment in a comment about, emergence is just basically, atheist hand waving. It's how you explain everything, which is emergence. But what's happening is that there's two things that I think are causing the meaning crisis. One is science is showing us how very strange the world is. It's quantum fields that are manifesting particles. Well, what else is in those fields? Well, we don't know. And so on that hand, the physical world is stranger than we can know, but also with cognitive science, we're pressing further and further into our own personhood, and we're seeing more and more spirit of geometry in our own personhood, and we're seeing ourselves increasingly hackable and understanding. And so we're pushing further into the person. But the more we do that, the more the personal aspect of emergence is arising and being seen and treated as agency. And, early on when I was working through the Vervaeke stuff, he would, he basically would make the point that, in a sense, we're kind of stuck with the language that we have, and evolution gives us, and so you find that all over the place, always giving personal agency to evolution. Now they say, well, it has no consciousness, because evolution, what is it? Is it a spirit? Is it a pattern? Is it, and if we are persons, and now, the irony is that, of course, while we're continuing to reduce personhood, which is going to put a whole lot of pressure on this Christian this humanism that is the legacy of Christianity, that wants to preserve a broad spectrum of people and give them a sacred, privileged position, the more we sort of break people down, the more we're going to be under pressure to sort of give that game up. And that's the fear. And, I don't see that Weinstein has any answers for that, although he doesn't want to. So we were chatting on the Discord this morning, and Sam made an observation which I thought was really helpful. He said, in some ways, Brett Weinstein's a Gnostic. I thought, well, that's interesting. And well, how? It's not that he's an immaterialist, but there's a certain amount of dualism in his world, because, well, evolution is the genocidal spelling bee. And he's also the same guy who's making the point about a repugnant morality. So you have the repugnant morality. So what made the world? Was it a demiurge? What is the basis for any morality when success is the outcome of adaptation? In other words, morality becomes indistinguishable from that which survives. But quite clearly, that's not where Brett will go with any of this stuff. Brett's very much, and I thought Brett, his comments about Judaism and Christianity were, that Christianity is part of the phylogenetic tree of Judaism, but basically, Judaism has been, mimetically adapting to Christianity. I think he's dead on right. See, I'm making a commentary about that video without actually treating the video. And so what tends to happen then is what I think we see not just in Brett, but in many people who are working this now as modernity recedes, because modernity keeps those lines fixed. As modernity recedes, we see, emergent moral agency increasingly being, I think, implicitly assumed in the systems. And that then becomes the foundation and the grounding for this Christian inheritance that they've taken out the Christian justification and foundation for it, and they're trying to sort of backfill it in. And they're using emergence and all of these things to sort of backfill in from what was hollowed out Christianity in this. And so in that way, I don't know if Gnosticism is necessarily the right term, but he's really got a dualism. Not really Manichaeism, but many Greek philosophies then had the idea that this world, which is a place of decay, is the product of a lesser God. Now for Brett Weinstein, it's the product of a morally lesser God. And now Brett suddenly has what he had, and again, Peugeot, if you look at Peugeot's commentary on Brett, Peugeot keeps tagging him. You keep appropriating this symbolism, Brett, this higher symbol. So Brett would say, well, the world seems to be the product of a morally lesser God, and now here we come with our morality. But well, where does this morality come from? Because biology or evolution or any of these gods that made the world don't give two bits for what side of the human or non-human line you're on, or any of this. So, and so I think what we increasingly have is, we're beginning to understand what Jordan Peterson has pointed out, that you're going to keep creating God. He's going to keep slipping into your language. You're that idea of God as whatever it is that's at the top of your hierarchy, you're just going to go back to it because it's just simply too deeply built into how we are. But then Weinstein, he's writing a book, I caught this again, on Chesterton's fence. And when you think about this, well, what's Chesterton's fence? Chesterton makes the point that if you're walking through a field and you run across a fence and you look around and you wonder, why is this fence here? And just looking around, you see no reason for why the fence would here. Chesterton's quip is leave the fence alone. Don't ever take a fence down until you truly know the reason why it was put up. Here's the irony of this for Brett Weinstein using Chesterton's fence so freely and repeatedly in his broadcast. Chesterton's fence is implicit agency. Some conscious, moral, willful, purposeful agent put up the fence, and you can't, in the moment, standing on the field, looking around at the context with a limited frame of reference in your consciousness, discern the purpose for it. But you presume to understand there is a purpose behind it, so therefore don't touch the fence. That's his huge point. This guy who blithely says, well, of course there is no purpose. Well, why don't you look at Chesterton's fence and say, of course there is no purpose? Well, evolution has a purpose. Oh my, you're putting a lot of agency in that. Evolution has a purpose. I thought its moral code was a genocidal spelling bee. It just starts coming apart. The point is that there is a purpose beyond the found world that you may not have information access to, therefore leave the fence up. In other words, presume conscious, moral, willful, reasonable intent with the world that you find. Well, how will you discern that? Well, you're only going to be able to discern it by actually trying to mind read. Well, how do we do that between human beings? We're actually pretty good at that. We're better at it than any other animal in the world. We're really good at mind reading ourselves, or each other. That's the point. And that's the point of recognizing the fence. You try to mind read. You try to read the mind and therefore understand the purpose, understand the agenda, understand the telos, understand exactly what's behind the found world. Then you're just in full-blown religion. Then you're just talking about the mind of God. Then you're worrying what's on God's mind, Eric Weinstein. That's religion. And, Alistair McGrath, it almost sounds like you're trying to start a new religion. Well, what are you going to base the religion on? And, of course, Jordan Peterson basically looks back and says, well, let's look at least the most successful human civilization to date in terms of what we think is the most moral and what we might crowdsource and say, these are the nations that everywhere else in the world wants to get to. Therefore, we should assume that this is probably the best civilization in the world. What was this civilization built on? It's built on that book. And so maybe if we study that book, even from a psychological point of view, then maybe we can learn something and perhaps not lose what we've got. Here, Western civilization is sort of Chesterton's fence, and maybe even be able to improve upon it. That's Jordan Peterson's main deal. But if you're really skittish about God number 2, very quickly, your God number 2 is unconscious, but still sort of has emergent agency and maybe even emergent purpose, sufficiently to put up a fence. Spirit is the right word, as I went into my last long video. Spirit is the right word because spirits are patterns. Look at school spirit. What is school spirit? School spirit inhabits the walls. It inhabits the pep rallies. It inhabits the architecture. It inhabits the students. It takes on, and we human beings were these little repeaters. Okay, we're these little repeaters. So it's like we're in a mesh network, and we take in and repeat, but we're not dumb repeaters. We keep changing it, and people play the telephone game, and people usually mock things like, well, the authority of the Bible because of the telephone game. You'll find that usually in the celebrity atheists. What they don't realize is that there's all this error correction that's going on, and the point isn't to get it just word for word to copy it directly like computer code. It's much more like it keeps getting improved, sort of like the highly compressed story of Cain and Abel that Jordan Peterson likes to use again and again in his talks. Patterns are indistinguishable from agency. This is where I have the Turing test. And what computers are able to do is discern patterns and discern patterns and discern patterns and start spitting them out to us. And we can't tell, is that agency? Is that not agency? We act as if it's agency. So when the computer is talking to you, you kind of act as if it's agency, but you hold mental reservation, you try and do it. Well, how will you relate to those patterns? You relate to those patterns as if you're relating to a person. You go full God number 2, which is exactly where Kanye and where human beings have gone. They get to the point of realizing God number 1 and then noticing all of the agency and the spirits that are in the world, and what's the only reasonable thing to do? You go full God number 2. And that's exactly where Kanye has gone. And so you wind up with both this self-deprecating humor and crazy boldness and pride at times. And Kanye, whatever you think of Trump's politics or his character, he takes his best shot. You got to give it to him because, hey, what are you waiting for? Why are you playing it safe? Now, wisdom and, read the book of Proverbs. But, Kanye takes his best shot. He goes for broke. He goes for the top. win, lose, fail, doesn't matter. He'll go for it. And at the end of Kanye's life, no one will say he didn't live. And you think about Jesus' parables of the talents. And, Jesus, the king is going away on a long journey. And so he distributes his assets to 3 of his servants. And to one servant, he gives 10 talents, or talents, which are these, big masses of gold resources. To one servant, let's just use millions of dollars. To one servant, he gives $10 million. To another servant, he gives $5 million. To the third servant, he gives $1 million. Now, in the back of your mind, well, why doesn't he give each one equally? Well, because he's no dummy and he understands who his servants are. And so the master comes back, or the king comes back from the long journey and calls his guys in. I said, I gave you $10 million before I left. What do you have to show for it? I earned another 10. Well done, good and faithful servant. You, fiver, come here. What'd you do? I earned another 5. Well done. You've done well. So the one with 10, I'm going to give you more resources because you're showing you're doing something with it. With 5, I'll give you more. You've shown me you're doing something with it. If you come back with 10 or 15, I would have liked it better and I would have given you more, but at least you did. And then the third one, okay, I gave you 1 talent. What'd you do with it? Well, I know that you're a tough, and of course, you listen to Jesus' parables and he's talking about God. And he says, I know you were the kind of master who reaps where he does not sow. God is a cutthroat business person, entrepreneur. And you think certain kinds of Christians will hear that and say, Bible's not shy about it. God, part of why I love God is I read the Bible and again, if you've listened to some of my other stuff, the diverse excellencies. This comes through in Jesus. He's both more humble and more audacious than anyone could imagine. He comes as a servant, Philippians 2, but he's the Son of Man. And he's more accepting, and that's the part that we sort of like about him. But he's also more demanding. Read the Sermon on the Mount. And you see all these discordant, diverse excellencies in Jesus. And so the master, and so the servant says, well, you gave me 1, and I know that I know that you're an aggressive business person, so I didn't want to lose any, so I hid it in the field. And so here it's back. And he says, take that talent and give it to the one who has 10. And everyone's like, well, that's not fair. What are you talking to me about fair for? And you who did nothing with 1, to the torturers. There's something of Kanye in this. He's, I should have more Kanye in me. Kanye doesn't, he's going to go for it. Going to look for a woman, he's going to get a porn star. He's Qoheleth. He's living life. He's living it with it down. Now, crash, burn, wind up broke, wind up in an insane asylum, wind up, however, it doesn't matter. Put the hammer down, put the pedal to the metal, floor the sucker, do it all the way. Hey, Kanye 2024, you probably run against Donald Trump that year. But you take your best shot and knowing you'll likely get taken down and lose. And on Good Friday, Jesus looks like the biggest loser, and his adult male disciples are in hiding, and the women and, young John is there looking at the cross, and they all think, boy, were we mistaken when we backed him. But you bet on Easter. And, that's what Kanye's doing. And, part of this is what I've been trying to look for the language for, because, and it all comes into God number 2 in many ways. Because if you're talking to an empty universe, if you're talking to mere emergence without consciousness that you can't really fully relate to. You can go to the Grand Canyon and look at the Grand Canyon and be filled with awe and understand, that little river could cut that canyon over immense periods of time, and it's just wow. And you go to Glacier, or you go to Yosemite National Park, and you go up into Glacier Point, and they have a big display there about how glaciers cut this and sheared off Half Dome, and you've got the other domes, and you go up on top of Sentinel Dome, and it's just glory. But you can't talk to it. Well, you can talk to it. People talk to it all the time. It's not unreasonable to talk to. And people come there to sort of sing its praises. But how much better is the world if it can talk back? How much better is the world if the world is not only alive and enchanted, but if the world is actually relational? And, again, I just played the video yesterday, Jordan Peterson, the discovery of the future. Well, how much better if you're bargaining with the future, if the future can talk back? Well, it's terrifying. Yes. I mean, Eric Weinstein's right. It's terrifying. You have to think about what's on God's mind. And if you go anywhere near a Calvinist, say, yeah, it's all up to God. And, you don't have any coins to purchase your way in. But yet you say, well, but the Bible is all full of these other ideas about challenge, and even just the parable of the talents. What about that? Yeah, that's exactly the point. You don't have any, your arms are too short to box with God. You don't have any way to manipulate or control God, so go for it. Just do it. Yeah, but it might hurt. Yeah, you might wind up broke, $50 million in debt. And you might wind up in the insane asylum where they're pumping drugs into you to numb your mind. And you might wind up living Kanye West's crazy life. But that might be an upgrade to the boring grayscale life you're living. Well, you say, well, I see lots of people living sort of on the edge. Yeah, but now suddenly Kanye West's Full God number 2 starts to make sense, because it isn't pure chaos. Because what Kanye is doing is really, in a Nassim Taleb sort of way, in a Jordan Peterson sort of way, looking behind him and saying, Peugeot says Kanye's, just intuitively into the patterns. Well, okay, so the world is full of patterns. Which patterns do you put at the top of your hierarchy? How do you relate to them? You should relate to them with the spirit of finesse. You should relate to them personally. Well, which patterns should you prioritize? Well, turn around and look in the past and see which patterns have brought people where. And, if Kanye's, white supremacy and yada, yada, yada about American history, I mean, again, it's just, is he right wing? Is he left wing? Is he what is he? Just round and round and round and round. And but how then do you find your way through all those patterns? Well, you look back and you say, you look back, because that's where you'll see the patterns. You can't see the patterns into the future because you can't see them yet. So you look back and you see that fence back there and you say, boy, if I can get further back to the people who built that fence, maybe I'll figure out what pattern that fence is manifesting. That's wisdom. Now, what's going to happen to Kanye? I don't know. But he sure is fun to watch. And I almost didn't make this video because they're watching Alex Jones on Joe Rogan today in the Discord server in a watch party. And I can't turn on the Discord server during work hours. I get sucked in. This is why you go Full God number 2. It's the only reasonable thing. Otherwise, you're just sort of like the kid who stands, when our kids were young, we used to take them to the city pools and get them swim lessons. And my youngest would stand on the side of the water and he'd shiver. Now, all my kids have been lifeguards since then because that was a great job from the city. And so we kind of pushed them into get the lifeguard training and then, hey, be a lifeguard. And so my kids, their summer jobs and some of them all school year jobs and continuing jobs have been lifeguards. But, my son was just standing outside the pool because he was cold. And it's like, toss the kid in. Why? Because you can stand outside the pool and watch everyone else swim, or you can get in the water. And going full God number 2 is getting in the water. And Kanye stopped playing, and Kanye did full Qoheleth. And Kanye, made money, lost money, designed this, designed that, did drugs. You name it, Kanye did it, and he had the highest access to the best of it. And now he says, fear God and keep his commandments, and, be the 10 talent guy. Don't sit around. And yeah, it'll be a bumpy ride, but we probably could all use a little bit more Kanye in us. So anyway, there's my commentary on this.